So you have this young man from Brownsville. I see some folks from Brownsville here. Young man from Brownsville comes to us in a really difficult situation with his mother. His mother is the victim in the traditional court system's point of view, and she calls the cops on her son. They're having it out. The judge says to us in the peacemaking program, you guys have to do something about this. We can't do this. I don't know what to do with a mother and a son. As a prosecutor said to me recently, when you have a situation with an assault between a mother and a son, what are you going to do if you prosecute it traditionally? Two things are going to happen in the traditional sense. One, the mother of this young man is not going to comply with the court, not going to testify, not going to sign a corroboration, not going to do anything, and your case is going to fall apart. Option number two, mother cooperates with the court, and the relationship breaks down between the mother and the son, basically probably for a really, really long time, and many years of therapy. Come in. So she's just decided, I can't handle these cases because I either ruin a relationship or ruin a court process, and neither of which are good outcomes. So, hey, peacemaking program, you guys handle this. So we start working with this young man, and it's a really bad situation. We do these sessions, they're circles. We bring community peacemakers to sit down with these with the young man and his mother, and we try to work on talking it through, to work on this relationship, to heal whatever is going on that ended up with cops being called. Hi, Emily. Bye, Emily. It's not going well in the peacemaking. Nothing's working. And one of our peacemakers says, well, he doesn't really say anything. He comes into the courthouse. He's 62 years old at the time. He's one of our unofficial mayors of the Red Hook community, older African-American gentleman. And he comes in with a box, and he sets up the peacemaking circle by himself, doesn't wait for any of our staff to do it. And he sets an extra chair out, and everyone comes in, the mother and the son and another peacemaker and one of our staff members. And then there's an empty chair. And then he sits down, and he says, okay, when we start this session, we start usually with a ceremony. We start usually with food, then there's a ceremony, and then they sit down. And he says, I don't really know what to do with you. You're so disrespectful to your mother, and I don't know how to get through to you. So I want to introduce myself properly and say, hi, I'm so-and-so. And right here sitting next to me in this box is my mother, and these are the ashes of my mother. And I took care of her until she was in her dying day, until like her last breath. And if I had my mother still here with me, I would not be so disrespectful to her. I would tell her I love her. I would tell her thank you for everything that you've done for me. And, needless to say, this was something that no one has ever done for this young man, to just say, this is it. This is your life, and I'm here, and I'm part of your community, and I care about you, and I want to show you from my heart how this can be different. The peacemaking goes on. We have 9 sessions. I'm telling you, this is not easy work. Finally, we get to the end. There's all sorts of other stories involved with this young man. We get to the end and everyone feels that this was a successful peacemaking case, and it goes back to court where it's going to be dismissed. And I wasn't part of this peacemaking, I should say. I've heard this story secondhand from various people who had interactions with it. So I meet this young man for the first time after hearing all these crazy stories. And he's like an awkward, tall, 20-year-old guy. And, clearly he's in court and he's nervous. And I just say, hey, I'm the peacemaking program director, and I've heard a lot about you from different people. And, what was this like for you? And he says, well, I feel less alone. That's it. And I said, okay. And so that was it. And his case was dismissed, and we've heard that he's doing really well because he stays in touch with one of his peacemakers. And so I guess I just wanted to open with that to say, like, things can be different, and we've heard a lot of things in this conference about making systems different, but we can be different. That's, I think, what restorative justice can be about, is us being a little bit different and not necessarily tweaking systems. I had a great privilege to work on the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge, and that's, we need to make systems change. That's an energetic, amazing thing, but we also can change and can be in relationship in a different way. So I think restorative justice gives us that opportunity, and I just wanted to frame this conversation so that we can be a little bit on the same page of what the opportunity that is offered to us with restorative justice. And it's really important. I was so glad that Shaka Barrows earlier mentioned Native American presence or lack thereof at this conference. When we talk about restorative justice, it is incredibly important to name the heritage that it comes from. And a lot of it does stem from Native American practices, from indigenous practices around the world, people who have been doing this work for a long, long time in their own ways and connected to their communities and their traditions. We learned ours from the Navajo Nation, and we have elders and mentors in that nation that I wanted to mention here and recognize and thank for their generosity. So when we talk about restorative justice and some of the change, we have some change makers here on the panel that I am very happy to be here with. Jose and Captain Joe and Judge Sloane from all over the country, who are people who have had a traditional role. We're here in a very law enforcement heavy moment with a prosecutor and a judge and a police officer to say, okay, you have your role, and then you have this opportunity, and what are we going to do with it? So restorative justice, just real briefly, focuses on a victim's voice, on the people who are affected by crime being part of the solution, and on healing the relationship and moving forward and not always punishing and looking backwards. That change where you're going to look forward and not look back, that's really what we're here to think about. And so I hope that we have that opportunity here. So that's it from me. And I'm going to ask our panelists to, each one at a time, just give you an overview of what they're working on in their jurisdiction. And if they can also just say why they do the work that they do. See, I gave them all a preview of the questions, and then said that I was lying and that I'd just throw in new questions when we were all together. So Jose comes to us from the Los Angeles City's Attorney's Office. He's been a prosecutor and running the Neighborhood Justice Program. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, I committed it to memory. For quite a long time, and I was a prosecutor in a former life as well. Little known fact, very well known fact, unknown. And so I'd like to start with you, Jose, if you can tell us a little bit about why did you come to this work, and what are you doing right now that you feel is a little bit different in your program?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jose Egurbide, and I work for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. Our jurisdiction is adult offenders within the city of Los Angeles that commit misdemeanor crimes, so up to a year in county jail. We get a lot of the petty crimes within the city of Los Angeles. The district attorney's office handles felonies. Recently, in the city of LA, we've had Prop 47, which has reclassified a lot of former nonviolent felonies to misdemeanors. And as an office, we review anywhere between 110 and 120,000 reports for filing consideration a year. And many of these offenses are quality of life offenses where the individuals, when they're going through the criminal justice system, which it tends to be a little heavy-handed for these types of crimes. These are individuals that are first-time nonviolent offenders, and their first experience with the criminal justice system can be extremely negative and label them as a criminal and possibly impact their behavior going forward. So as an office, we decided that there's got to be a better alternative for these individuals who really, when you look at the different principles, for the different, I guess, goals for the criminal justice system, you really don't need to incapacitate, or you really don't need retribution against these individuals. What you need is more rehabilitation and education. And so we started looking at different models in California, elsewhere, and I love one of the themes about this amazing conference, which is curiosity and inquisitiveness, and don't be afraid to go out and look at what everybody else is doing, and beg, borrow, steal, do whatever you need to do to implement those solutions. So we saw a lot of great things happening, and what we wanted to accomplish was to come up with an alternative prosecution model that allowed individuals an alternative at the earliest possible stage. So it's a post-arrest, pre-filing diversion program that uses restorative justice. And we'll talk a little bit more about what restorative justice means, but just by way of introduction to our program, we take these individuals, and before we file a criminal charge against them, we contact them and we offer them a voluntary and confidential process by way of a community panel, where the offender gets to sit down with 3 members of the community who we train on restorative justice principles, and a trained mediator who acts as a neutral facilitator for the discussion. And during that discussion, they talk about the 3 main principles of restorative justice. Talk about the root causes for the harm, the effect of their actions on the victim and the community, and then discuss a series of obligations that they're willing to agree to in order to move forward positively. They have 2 months to complete this diversion, these obligations. So at the end of the panel, a restorative justice agreement is signed, and if they complete these obligations, which can range from community service to a letter of apology, a reflection essay, counseling, classes, competency development, these obligations, when they're completed, the diversion is deemed successful, and the case is never filed. So they avoid the negative consequences of a conviction or criminal record.
Can I just give a little background about you, Captain Joe?
Sure.
Captain Joe is from Dane County. Who's had an opportunity to meet people from Dane County? I get a little excited about Dane County. There is Dane County. Captain Joe's a 32-year veteran of the Madison Police. I have been very moved just hearing from him about his journey, and he's now being trained as a peacemaker in his program. Yeah, there's... So I'll let him do the speaking, but I just wanted to say that.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Erika. Well, first of all, I'm very proud to have been invited here by the Center for Court Innovation, representing Madison Police Chief Mike Koval, the City of Madison, all the good people of Dane County. We are very blessed being a very forward-thinking, progressive community, about 2 hours up Interstate 90 from where we sit this morning. But at the same time, we have issues that every community and many of the communities that you represent here in this room face as well. Quick story about some of our restorative justice efforts. A critical point for us was in 2013, and we have been studying and looking at racial disparities in Dane County dating back to the late 1990s. It's nothing new. Much like the speakers this morning, our violent crime in Madison peaked about the same time Chicago did, actually, in the early 1990s in Madison. Back in that day, I was a neighborhood police officer experimenting with the ideas of neighborhood policing in a neighborhood that Supervisor Stubbs and her mother lived in. And as we evolved in our journey, it was really in 2013 the Annie Casey Foundation funded a study that the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families did that really thoroughly documented the human condition of the African American community in Dane County. And it was nothing for us to be very proud of. But that work that the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families did it set the benchmark. And when you look at that report and the work that was done, A small fraction of it really related to law enforcement and prison, and I got a statistic here I'll give you here in a second, but the bulk of it really looked at a number of other factors that many other institutions in Dane County and the city of Madison stepped forward and started to take responsibility for. With regards to incarceration, the Annie Casey funded report noted that while Dane County African Americans made up 4.8% of the population, and we're just over 500,000 in population now, African Americans represented 44% of the people we sent to prison every year in Dane County. Okay, we have a Dane County jail with an inmate population of about 800 or so on a daily basis. About 150 of those are on electronic monitoring or work release, and I don't need to tell you what you can think the population of what the jail looks like. Supervisor Stubbs, Sheila, would you raise your hand, please? Dane County Board Supervisor Stubbs, a month after that report came out, introduced at the tail end of the 2014 Dane County budget a $60,000 budget resolution to do something. And when you have a crisis and when it's documented, the next thing that needs to happen is for leaders to come forward, and Sheila did that. And Sheila had a vision. She goes, we got to try something. And her vision was to try a community court in the south side of Madison, where her focus was 17 to 25-year-olds, and Sheila's background is in probation and parole supervision. So she's very much an academic, understands the underlying issues here to what's going on. I, at the time, happened to be the captain in about my 30th year in the department of the South District. And the way Madison polices itself is that we're very strongly committed to community policing, and we take the city of about 250,000, we break it down into 5 districts, and each district has a captain and detectives and officers, and we go out and we make it happen. In each one of those districts in Madison, and mine on the south side, near west side of Madison, adjacent to the University of Wisconsin campus, is about 40,000 people, and it's very diverse. I got some of the richest university professors and others in my neighborhood, all the way down to homeless, and a lot of people living on general assistance. But our crime, interestingly, we've always been stigmatized as having all the crime, but when you look at other districts in Madison, our Part 1 crime is actually less per capita than some of the other police districts in Madison, which when I put those numbers up, people always got a big kick out of seeing. When we started our effort in the spring of 2014, Sheila put $60,000 in the Dane County Human Services budget, and there's a guy in this room. Is Ron Chance in here? No, Ron's not in here. But the other Ron is here. And but Ron Chance, longtime Dane County Human Services manager, came to me, and I've known Ron for many years because I've done a lot of work with Dane County Human Services over my career, and said, Captain Joe, we want to start this thing down here. And I kind of pointed Ron to some other districts in the city where there was a lot more crime and arrest and this and that, but I said, you know what, you're absolutely right. This is the place to do it because we really had the backbone. We had a lot of the service providers in South Madison, and it just made sense. And Ron Johnson, we proceeded to hire out of the city of Milwaukee, where he had worked as a community activist, working with a lot of gangs, involved individuals in the north side of Milwaukee for many years. Ron received his formal restorative justice training from Justice Geske at the Marquette Law School, and we were very fortunate to bring Ron to Madison. And just a quick side note, some of you may know our recent police chief we had in Madison, Noble Ray, who had a great tenure, great run at the Madison PD. He's now working at DOJ in the cops office. But Ron was Noble Ray's 5th grade teacher, so the guy hides his age pretty well. But our program focuses on 17 to 25-year-olds, and since we went live last July, we've had almost 20 individuals that we've been able to identify that are basically first offenders right now. I worked pretty hard behind the scenes at creating an MOU, because I believe that anytime you create these initiatives and you got multiple agencies involved, it's really important to put it down in writing what the sandbox is going to look like you're going to plan. So the Madison City Attorney, the Madison Police Chief, the Dane County District Attorney, Ishmael Zahn, who is the only African-American District Attorney in the state of Wisconsin, and Lynn Green, who's a Dane County Human Services Director. We took and created an MOU that identified our South Madison misdemeanor 17 to 25-year-old pilot court that we've been working on. It's a work in progress. We're really got some struggles I may talk about in some of the other questions, Erika, but in terms of expanding and things like that. But one other shout out I got to give about another restorative justice effort, and that lady over there, Lori Herkes, raise your hand, Lori. She represents a nonprofit in Madison called Dane County Time Bank, and to them and the Dane County YWCA have been absolutely unbelievable in their restorative justice efforts in Madison. And in one of the other areas that Lori specifically is focusing on right now is our 12 to 16-year-olds. And in 2014, the City of Madison Police Department issued 861 citations to 12 to 16-year-olds. 3 out of every 4 of them went to a Black or Latino youth. And what we did in conjunction with Madison Municipal Court Judge Dan Koval, who happens to be Chief Koval's brother, we instituted a new program in September last year where every single 12 to 16-year-old who we issue a city ordinance citation to, they have an option to avoid going to municipal court and paying the fine civil forfeiture associated with that if they call the YWCA and set up a restorative justice class with either YWCA or Dane County Time Bank. And they complete that class, and we get word back from the YWCA that they went to the class and took care of it. We tear the ticket up. We don't enter it into it as an arrest in our system. We're expecting a big decrease in our 12 to 16-year-old arrest numbers that we report monthly to the FBI. But I had to mention that program because that's really exciting too. So we've got a lot of neat things going.
Thank you, Captain Joe. I'd like to introduce Judge Herman Sloan from the Atlanta Municipal Court. I'm going to read your title because I'm really scared of messing that up. Presides over the Atlanta Municipal Court's Community Court and administers the Restorative Justice Board.
Yes.
Do you have more to your title then? Is that good?
That's good.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I, like Captain Joe, was so honored and surprised when I got called to ask to come speak because I heard about it from our chief judge, and he sent me the email, and I told him I wanted to go because I wanted to find out what it is that I'm not doing and how to do it better. And when I was asked to speak, it's like, sure. I preside over our community court. Our community court is very interesting. We have what we refer to as our clinical side, where we deal with people who have drug addiction and mental health issues. We will get them into treatment. We have a teens learning control program. We handle traffic offenses. So for drivers under the age of 21 in the state of Georgia, there's a special set of laws that apply to them. So in order to keep them from losing their driver's license and also to help them become better drivers, we developed this program for them. Then we have the Talented 10th Leadership Program, which is a program that we do with an outside agency. That is for persons between the ages of 17 and 29 who have felony arrest. And you could have several arrests. But they are usually in court before me on a misdemeanor charge. And they will go through a very intense 16-week program, and once they complete that program, as with all of our diversion programs, the charges are dismissed. And then we have the Restorative Board program. That was the reason I decided to ask the then Chief Judge if I could go to community court. We have had several judges before me. One of them was more concerned about getting people to do community service. One was more concerned about the mental health issues, and my concern was that big gap that just seems to get overlooked, the 17 to 25-year-olds. And so I asked if I could do the community court, and I was talking with several of my friends who've known me for years, and one is a judge in Fulton County. We've known each other since high school. And when I told her I wanted to do community court, she just laughed and said, "Man, you're not touchy-feely. That's not for you." And she's right. I'm not. She and I had been prosecutors together for years, and you know, I've prosecuted everything from spitting on the sidewalk to death penalty cases, and so it was a shock to them for me to say I want to go to community court because that there is that group of people, and Judge Perez mentioned it yesterday, that when you go back to your community and you see your community, then you know that there is something that you have to do. And a large number of those 17 to 25-year-olds that come in front of me come from my community. They may not be from the exact location that I'm from, and most of them are surprised to find out where I am from. But they are the people who, if we don't get them while they have the misdemeanor charge and get them pointed in that right direction, then they will end up being the person who some prosecutor will see on a felony charge. And the way our restorative board is set up, we've divided the city into 4 quadrants. We have 15 city council people, and every city council person wants a restorative board in his or her district, but they refuse to fund 15 boards. So we've divided the city up into 4 quadrants, and we have boards that meet in those 4 quadrants. If you commit a crime in 30314, then you will go to what we call our District 1 board. That board will see you. If you commit a crime, but you in 30314 and you live in 30318, then you're going to go to our Washington Heights board, because that's the district that covers where you live. So we try to get them to go where they either offended or where they live. And the board members, that's the hardest thing, and maybe I'll get into that later, is trying to get people to be committed to serve on the board. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. It's post-adjudicatory, and the cases, and we have phenomenal success rate, are dismissed. It is very rare for a person not to complete the restorative board program. Charges are dismissed. Once they're dismissed, they're advised how to go about getting it expunged and cleared from their record.
So maybe we'll just start with you, Judge Sloan, if that's okay. I think it's really interesting, this concept of not being a touchy-feely person and being in this room right now. So I think it's the best part. So how do you think about the blame paradigm, and what did it take for you to make that trip into this room?
Well, I don't think that if we spend too much time dealing on casting the blame, then we miss the opportunity. I believe it was the doctor from the National Institute of Drug Abuse that talked about how the brain developed, and that part that deals with reasoning doesn't develop usually until the person is 25. And you have to look at all the other environmental factors that come into play. And one of the things that I do when we are training boards, and a lot of you don't know, well, you've heard of Santana. Well, back in the 70s, maybe it was 74, 75, Santana had an album with a lion's head on it. And when I was in college, at every party, we would have some drinks, and we'd try to count the number of humans that are actually depicted in that lion's head. Yes.
Ask a question, right?
But the interesting thing is, in trying to train adults, people my age and older and some younger, and having to deal with that young person who has gone into the Kroger and stolen something, the first perception is this person is just simply a shoplifter. But if you look at that Santana lion's head, it's like, look, there's something else here other than the lion. So you have to get the boards, the individuals, to look beyond what it was that the person did. And one of the things that we have all of our people who appear before the board to do is they're given an opportunity to tell what they did. Not just simply, I went into the store and concealed a 6-pack of beer. But why did I go in the store? Why did I do what I did? Because once you find out why the person did what they did, there may be other things that are at play there. We had one board where one of the board members was very involved in housing. In fact, she managed several apartment complexes. So she helped tremendously in getting people who were committing crimes of opportunity, not necessarily opportunity, but I guess survival, into apartments. So you have to not just simply look and blame, you have to try to get beyond the blame to find out why did they do what they did, and what can we do to help repair not only the harm that they committed to the larger community, but the harm to that individual as well.
Thank you. So thinking about blame again, because it's, I think, something that has driven our systems for a long time. Jose, do you want to talk a little bit about accountability and what it means to you as a prosecutor?
Sure. And just to sort of piggyback on Judge Sloan's comments, I think sometimes good people make bad choices. I found myself watching Magic Mike last night at 2:45. Thinking about what I was going to say here today, and one thing led to another, and I'm like, oh, it's 2:45. Bad choice. But no, but I think what the judge just hit on is again, restorative justice is a violation of relationships. We're getting away from the traditional criminal justice system idea that you violated the law, so you committed crime A, B, C, and you're going to get punishment X, Y, Z. It's very transactional, and in a sense, we're losing an opportunity to transform these individuals. So, in terms of accountability, you're not being held accountable for your actions by being imprisoned or by being punished. If you think about, how many people have kids in the audience? Think about your own kids, your relationship with them, and what happens when you punish them? What happens when you put them in their room, or you give them, you're heavy-handed? Do they tune you out? Do they actually listen? Or is it more likely that they're going to re-offend or recommit that offense just to be like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to rebel? I have 3 boys, and that's been my experience. As opposed to when I engage them as an equal, and I challenge them to think about what they did, and think about how their actions impact others. Because in restorative justice, you got to look at those relationships with your community, with the victim, and even with your own family as an offender. We don't even call the offender an offender because we call them participants. Because we want to get away from labeling them as a wrongdoer. So in that sense, you hold them accountable because you bring them into a discussion. And and by the way, I have to give a shameless shout out to BJA and to CCI, because they're our partners in all of this, and they're the ones that really allow us to sort of stretch the legs of our program. But we look at these relationships by taking the parties most impacted by the offense, and that is the victim, the offender, and the community. Somebody talked about a 3-legged stool of criminal justice. Well, we look at a 3-legged stool of restorative justice, and those are the 3 parties. And the community also has to be brought in. There's a lot of restorative justice models that are very victim-oriented, and the only focus is on repairing the harm to the victim. Other restorative justice models are, especially in juvenile restorative justice principles, think about the offender equally. In other words, the offender is part of the community, and the offender needs to be made whole as well. So when you talk about repairing the harm, in a lot of the communities in Los Angeles, the harm's been done through decades of disenfranchisement, poverty, lack of education, lack of opportunities. And so those those are conditions that need to be addressed when we have an opportunity to engage the offender. So that's something that we're looking at. So it's not just about accountability. Sure, I mean, when an offender is given the opportunity to participate in our program, they have to be willing to take responsibility for their actions. Not in the legal sense, but in the sense of, yes, I did that. And I'm willing to make amends. And that's the beginning of the discussion.
Thank you. I want to pick up on the point you just made before that. I think there's an opportunity with restorative justice to think about, we've been talking a lot about public mistrust, of the lack of confidence in our systems. And restorative justice, I think, gives us an opportunity to think on different levels about what we're restoring. And we're definitely focusing on relationships and on healing and on individuals. But we also have an opportunity to think about what we can restore with these processes in terms of our systems, in terms of our relationships to those systems, to our communities, to take the restorative justice opportunity to think on that different scale. So I want to ask Captain Joe this question. What do you see as the opportunity? You mentioned those statistics, those really quite difficult to hear statistics about racial injustice in your county. So where do you see the opportunity to deal with racial justice in a restorative justice framework? I'm sorry, I give you the tough question.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different ways, and I think the way I want to respond, Erika, is thinking about local police. Because one of the things I'm kind of struck by, I think myself and maybe the other officer from Madison came down here with, I don't think there's a lot of cops here at this conference. And I think it's really important that the police are part of helping us address racial injustice. Because that has been, we've been on the forefront of that in Madison, but I don't think, quite honestly, I don't think it's the case in all places in the country. When we were prepping for this and did our conference call, I mentioned kind of a statement that's basically the founding principles of American policing. And a lot of people don't know what our roots are, but the concept of policing in America comes from England. And it was an individual by the name of Sir Robert Peel in the early 1800s that started the first London Metropolitan Police Department. And London at the time was a growing urban area with a lot of petty theft, larceny, muggings, things like that was starting to happen in London in the early 1800s as the city was growing. And the only other concept of policing they had to look at was France. And they looked at France and they watched how the government of France was using its police to beat down and oppress people. And Sir Robert Peel said, well, we sure don't want our police to look like that. And one of the principles, there's 9 principles that Sir Robert Peel identified, but here's one I think is very germane to racial justice. The police are the public, and the public are the police. The police being only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent upon every citizen in the interests of community welfare and existence. Those words are really profound, and they are as relevant today in 2016 as they were when Robert Peel said them in 1829. And I think we lose sight of that and the community's role and how we all have a stake in public safety and racial injustice, I would add. Because I think if Sir Robert Peel was alive today, I also think he would say that your police department should also reflect your community. I'm fortunate to come from a department in a city that 40 years ago, under a guy by the name of Police Chief David Cooper, who spent 20 years as a police chief in Madison. He came to Madison in the late 1960s amid the Vietnam War protests that were going on in the streets of Madison, Berkeley, and other places around the country, as we had a largely white police department that was beating college protesters, including our today mayor, Paul Soglin, with nightsticks in that day. Chief Cooper realized that he needed to work on creating a more diverse, educated police department, and he started on that. And it took him 10 years to start to turn that page, but it really took his last 10 years to really put things into action. And I'll say this, that what Chief Cooper did in the 1970s and 80s, and I was hired in 83, has many of the things he implemented have now maintained and become part of the culture. And some of you may have heard me ask a couple questions to Judge Pratt yesterday morning and others. Culture is such a big thing of what we're trying to do here. And in the city of Madison and the Madison Police Department, we now have a culture that has now transcended 4 different police chiefs. And a lot of the things that have now been institutionalized. We haven't done performance evaluations in the Madison Police Department since the late 1980s. Yeah. Okay? The usual annual review that you get from your supervisor, we got rid of them 30 years ago, just about. When I tell that to other police departments at police conferences, they're just amazed by that. Good luck to the next police chief who comes into Madison and thinks he's going to put down stick annual performance appraisals into the department because he needs them for accountability. No, we've got a culture up there that is started first and foremost by the people we bring. Jim Collin wrote a great book, Good to Great. One of the chapters of that book, you have to get the right people on the bus. Chief Cooper started us down that path, and today the city of Madison has grown tremendously since Chief Cooper's days. We have 460 commissioned officers. Over 30% of our department is female. 20% of our department is minority. And nearly 90% of the department has at least a 4-year degree. And a number of us have master's and law degrees, okay? And we also pay good money for those officers in those positions. We recruit this country to try to find the best officers we can to come to Madison and keep them there. And once we get them there, oftentimes they'll do 25, 30 plus years and spend their whole career there when they thought they were going to be doing something else. And it's interesting because our current chief, Mike Koval, he became chief from the rank of sergeant, where he was the sergeant of our training team, and he's a lawyer by training at the University of Wisconsin Law School. He trained our law academy for 17 years, was also our lead recruiter to help build the department that we have today. And Mike, just in April 2014, went from sergeant to chief, which for a mid-sized department the size of Madison around this country is almost unheard of. And he was born and raised in Madison too, which is even a neater part of the story. So they think, if I kind of got to your question, Erika, I think that you got to build.
You're talking about integrity, really.
Right. You got to build from the inside. You got to build that department. It has to reflect the community, and we are networked in a multitude of different ways. I'll kind of hold off on my comments for now and reserve some for others. But our web and our networking with this very talented police force in this community extends far beyond just the rank of chief or command staff. It's in the men and women, really, of the organization and the culture that we've created over 4 decades.
Great.